He asked that a Chamorro member of the panel respond. Mr. Santos, would you like to?
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, I was involved very actively during the time of the reintegration of the Northern Marianas and Guam. I remember during the plebiscite when it was held here on Saipan and on Guam, I persuaded Speaker Joaquin Arriola back then that the best thing to do is to hold the plebiscite same time, same day, here on Saipan and on Guam. But he rejected that idea and said, go ahead and do it on Saipan first, and then later on Guam. The Guam voters rejected the idea for reintegration, but the Saipan voters voted for it. Let me correct that. It was a reverse. Guam voted first. I forgot when was that, whether it's on a Saturday or on a Sunday. And when Guam rejected, it was heavily contested here on Saipan. But we went out and felt that at that time it was the avenue of perhaps a better standard of living for the people of Saipan, Rotantenian. But when Guam rejected that, we sought a different avenue. Many of the Guaminian back then believed that some of the works that was available then will be taken up by the Chamorro from Saipan. And in fact, one senator made fun of the Saipan idea that who's going to go up to Pagan, some Guaminian. So after that rejection from the people of Guam, we sought a different avenue. Dave Sablan, of course, has alluded to the fact that this idea started when his dad was a mayor. I remember that because I was in that crowd. I guess it was July 4th, 1946, when the late Mr. Sablan mentioned about U.S. citizenship. And then that continues with the administration of the then Mayor Benavente. But we kind of forgot about Guam after we have achieved this relationship with the United States. And it slowly died out. I don't have any feedbacks from the community nowadays. At one time, I guess, former Governor Guerrero has mentioned about a statehood in which, of course, an eventual unification between the people of Guam and the Northern Marianas. I hope this will give you just a little bit insight of the background.
Dave Sablan has a comment.
Just a short one. Again, listening to my dad talk about the political status and how we wanted to become part of the United States, he felt that we should go directly with the United States at that time. Ben distinctly remembers that because there were actually the genesis of the two-party system started from there. The Popular Party went on one side, and the Republican Party, the Progressive Party, wanted direct annexation with the United States. And I asked my dad, I said, why the difference of opinion? He says, because there are only 14,000 people here as opposed to nearly 100,000 people in Guam. How can you equitably be represented in a situation where Guam has a unicameral? And how can we share the budget the money situation. How much voice will we have? And this is basically the imparity that existed in those days, and I think that's why my father took the position that perhaps we should try to work directly with the United States for our political status.
I just want to interject here that there was a time in our history where, as a result of act of desperation, our people were almost undertake a political suicide. We went to the extent of exploring a possibility of becoming a municipality of Guam, and thanks God that we were rejected. And then we had the wisdom to undertake a separate negotiation, and now, as a result of this, we have the Commonwealth, and I believe Guam is still trying to emulate our status, and I hope they will succeed in their efforts.
Anyone else like to comment on that? I'd like to add just one question that I'd like just a quick yes or no answer on from the panelists, the Chamorro panelists, and that is the idea of a unified Chamorro state or nation forever dead? Do you think there's any possibility that that would ever be revisited in any form?
Well, the Commission, as our earlier indicated, we have the mutual consent provision there, and I think that would be a very difficult undertaking to modify that. Any relationship with a territory such as Guam will require a substantial modification of the mutual consent provision of the covenant. So I believe for all intent and purposes, and I'm looking at Dr. Enos here, I don't think the municipality of Rota and Otinian would like to be incorporated into a unicameral body where at one time in our history you were totally underrepresented. I think that would be a real challenge, and I think for all intent and purposes the question of a Chamorro nation is pretty much in the back burner. We are now U.S. citizen, and I think that's the most significant part of this relationship.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to add on also that I feel that it will take a long time before the people of the Commonwealth would even think about reunification. Right now, the government, the Commonwealth here, is enjoying all of the benefits that Guam is trying to seek to get from the federal government. We have a Commonwealth, and we have our own control of politics, our economic destiny. We have it, and we're satisfied with it. The only reason why people would want to change is because if they are not satisfied. That's looking at it from that purely from that standpoint. There may be the social aspect of it, which is not too strong. I don't believe that just because we have lots of relatives on Guam that the people from the Commonwealth would like to have a political reunification. I don't think that that alone would be strong enough. I think political control here, as we have it now, is far more stronger to resist reunification. Because the old feeling of being shunned by Guam a long time ago is dying off. But nevertheless, whenever there are discussions that I participate in or somehow hearing, some people still bring that up as an issue. Guam slapped us around in 1969 when we needed it the most to be part of America, because we want to go there for education and to work and so forth. But then Guam just turned around and said, why should we inherit the beggars from the Commonwealth, from the Northern Marianas? That some people express it that way. So the sentiment is still there. So I think thirdly, there is that sentiment also from the people of Guam that because the Marianas was dominated by Japanese for 30 years, and then during the war, we had people from the Chamorros especially going to Guam and start slapping Guamanians around during the occupation of Japan. That still remains a strong, somehow a strong aspect in the minds of some old people in Guam. So there's that hatred that exists, and that also would create a different opposition coming from Guam and not from us. Thank you.
Is there another question from the audience? Anyone else would like to ask a question, perhaps taken in a different direction? Again, looking at the past and present of the covenant. This afternoon, we'll look at the future. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, I must say that I have learned an awful lot already today, and I want to thank Howard and the panel members for their insights. Beyond that, I think it's rather amazing the fantastic job that the Marianas Political Status Commission did in negotiating this covenant with the United States. We can look now after 20 years and say there's a lot of things that could have been done. I don't think so. I think they did more than any other negotiating group has ever done with the United States, particularly in getting the United States to agree to limit its plenary power over the territories. And I think they deserve every bit of credit for being extremely sophisticated and persuasive negotiators, most likely to the surprise and amazement of their counterparts on the U.S. side, who probably expected a lot less. And every time I see the covenant, I'm amazed at what a wonderful job they did. That being said, I first of all have one comment for Dave. My hair at least slid down to my chin. I don't know what happened to yours. John, you said maybe we could go in a slightly different direction. And although we've been operating so far today at a rather high level of abstraction with respect to the negotiations, Howard, with his puzzle, did go into some of the details. And God, as they say, is in the details. I have a question with respect to the plenary power of the U.S. Congress and of the Northern Marianas legislature, or lack thereof, under the covenant. On the federal side, Howard, you mentioned the provision that permits the United States to legislate for the Marianas when it can't do it for the rest of the states if they mention the Northern Marianas by name. And I'm wondering, on this federal side, what type of legislation that might be that would not then interfere with local self-government, which is also guaranteed to the Marianas. What's left in that area of direct legislation that would not then interfere? On the local side, as you mentioned, Howard, the covenant, and also together with the applicable laws, treaties, and constitutional provisions of the United States, are the supreme law in the Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth Constitution. There are provisions in the covenant that permit local executive power to be vested in the governor or in other officials. The corresponding provision for the legislature says the legislature shall have jurisdiction over all rightful subjects of legislation. Does not specifically permit delegation or divestiture of the legislature of that. I'm wondering what wrongful subjects of legislation might be and what was meant, and also whether the people of the Northern Marianas, constitutionally or otherwise, can divest the legislature of any subject of legislation. I notice, for example, with respect to to education, there is some question as to whether the legislature can pass laws that affect educational policy. So I'm wondering, particularly Howard, but others as well, if you could address what is meant by laws that can't apply to the states on the federal side that don't affect self-government, and the plenary power of the Northern Marianas legislature under the covenant as opposed to the Constitution of the Northern Marianas. Thank you.
The question is primarily directed to Howard. Howard, would you care to respond? Do you understand the questions? There are two.
I won't ask you to repeat them, John. I do have some familiarity with the questions, but I'm not too sure that the time available permits me to elaborate on them in the detail necessary. First, with respect to rightful subjects of legislation that is assigned by the covenant to the Commonwealth legislature, the term rightful subjects of legislation was a well-recognized term in the federal laws at the time that we were negotiating the covenant. It was accepted by the United States negotiators as the broadest possible statement of legislative power that could be assigned to an insular area. And it was accepted and urged by the Marianas Political Status Commission because of that breadth. A wrongful subject of legislation presumably would be one that sought to intrude on a power assigned by the U.S. Constitution to the federal government. So if the Commonwealth Legislature would try to impose on foreign commerce, for example, or interstate commerce, it would be exceeding its constitutional authority, both under the covenant and under the Constitution. And under the superb leadership of the Speaker, the legislature has not attempted such excessive action in recent years. With respect to the, but I do say on that point that David also alludes to, there are only 3 branches of government. There are only 3 branches defined in the covenant, executive, legislative, and judicial. And there are only 3 branches defined in the Commonwealth Constitution. So there is some confusion, I think, in the community, and including perhaps the legal community, as to whether the legislature or indeed the governor can establish a 4th branch of government. There's no such thing. If it's not a court, and if it's not a body of the legislature, then it is a part of the executive branch, subject to those limitations that are spelled out in the covenant and the Constitution. And that's a fairly important point of interest in the community, I think, but it's a matter of self-government to administer those provisions in the most sensible ways that meet the needs of the community. With respect to the limitations on the power of the United States Congress, David raises an interesting point. It is certainly true that the covenant expressly gives the United States Congress the authority to pass a law for the Commonwealth that it could not pass with respect to the states, subject only to the condition it specifically name the Commonwealth by name. The concern during the negotiations was that the territorial power of the United States Congress was very broad and did apply to the Commonwealth, but that the exercise of territorial power did not necessarily mean that the action was not in the benefit of the Commonwealth. In other words, if the Congress wanted to enact a specific law that benefited the Marianas by providing more funds or by doing something else, it has the power to do so. And so you shouldn't necessarily assume that an action by the United States Congress directed specifically at the Marianas is to be avoided or is necessarily bad law. Now, this is a highly abstract discussion because I believe our experience is that the United States Congress has not acted in a way specifically directed at the Commonwealth that's injurious to the Commonwealth's right of self-government. Our problem with the our problem with the United States or the federal government has been with the executive branch of the federal government, and not, in my judgment at least, the U.S. Congress. But if either the Congress or the executive branch through executive order were to take unilateral action applicable to the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas and specifically named it, and that operated to impair what reasonable men and judges, men, women, and judges, would consider an intrusion on local self-government, then in my opinion, that would be prevented by the mutual consent provision, and it would intrude on the protected right of self-government under Section 103. But that's essentially the lawyer's response to lawyers' questions. There are margins here of a complex relationship that could raise these kinds of issues. I think for the most part, those issues have not been raised, and we're well off for that having been the case.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question? Because you said the Congress has not yet so acted. Would, if the Congress were to enact the legislation that's presently before it to federalize the minimum wage and immigration control, would that constitute an action in contradiction to the local self-government issues, or are those specifically provided for in the covenant?
Yes, John. I mean, the authority of the Congress to enact those laws is specifically provided for in the covenant for the different reasons that I may have alluded to earlier, and which we can speak about in more detail in the afternoon. I think as Pete A. Tenorio stated during his statement, the question is not one of power of the United States Congress to do what the executive branch is recommending that it do. The question is whether the U.S. Congress should do this, and whether it should take such a positive and extreme step without a full consideration of all the pertinent issues. And so the issue is not one of power. The issue is whether the power ought to be exercised at this time, and if so, with what objectives in mind.
Thank you for that question. Is there another question from the audience for any member of the panel? Justice Villagomez.
Tess.
Merged lands, was that considered in the negotiations?
Well, thank you, Mr. Justice. Every time Deanna and I visit the island, we are challenged by one distinguished member of the Commonwealth Legislature who accuses us of surrendering the EEZ to the federal government. And after several beers, we try to persuade him that that shouldn't be a responsibility that we want to assume. It is a complicated issue, as you well know, and in fact, it's now in court. It's in court before the federal court here, and the Commonwealth represented by two very fine lawyers who've spent many years here. Dan McMeekin and Don Woodworth are counsel for the Commonwealth in pursuing those matters. I have clear views on one issue. I have less clear issues on perhaps the more important issue. With respect to the land immediately adjacent to 3 miles, my judgment is that the trust territory, whatever the trust territory had with respect to these lands, whatever it was entitled to under international law at the time, came to the Northern Marianas. And so the question is, what did they have? And I think it does cover the seas immediately adjacent to the land. The more difficult question, of course, is as the law of the sea was evolving at that time, the Marianas Political Status Commission was not very well equipped to take a position that the Commonwealth should have jurisdiction out to 12 miles or 200 miles. In fact, that concept was just emerging. In 1974 and 1975, the Micronesians in the Congress of Micronesia were hiring their own consultants and taking an independent view in the international negotiations that resulted in the convention that ultimately the United States did not sign in any event. So I think with respect to the more extended rights that the Commonwealth is trying to define and ascertain, that matter is in court, and I'm confident that the best arguments on both sides will be presented. I think it's very important to remember that there would have been no separate negotiations if the Commonwealth's representatives had not said, yes, we're willing to accept the sovereignty of the United States. There's no question about that. And whenever sovereignty of the United States was challenged by any position that the Northern Marianas Political Status Commission took, Ambassador Williams and the U.S. delegation reminded the Commission of why they were having separate negotiations. Because if they took positions that the Micronesians were taking in the quest for a free association relationship, the negotiations with the Marianas would have stopped. So, and as you well know, the concept of sovereignty is a very amorphous one, and the lawyers disagree as to what it means, and everyone asserts meanings that serve their own individual purposes. But the United States delegation had a very strong view on that, and the Marianas Political Status Commission felt that it had to achieve its goals within the confines of U.S. sovereignty.
Dave? Sure.
I'd like to give one fact that might be useful, at least with respect to the exclusive economic zone. At the time that the covenant was signed, the U.S. did not recognize exclusive economic zones. The Fisheries Conservation and Management Act, now called the Magnuson Act, was passed in the months between the signing of the covenant and the plebiscite. So there was no reason for the Marianas Political Status Commission to have negotiated the issue, because the U.S. didn't recognize that that issue even existed, although many other countries had claimed it. This is one reason why the second legislature enacted the local CNMI Marine Sovereignty Act to put in a claim before U.S. sovereignty attached. But in any case, it would not have been a subject for negotiation at the time that the covenant was negotiated, because of the absence of any U.S. law on the subject. And it was kind of bad news that that act was enacted in between that period, because had there been an opportunity, I'm sure these fine people on the Political Status Commission would have made that one of their highest priorities, given the relationship of the indigenous people of Marianas to the sea around them.
Thank you. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. John, you have a question?
Thank you. Con rispetto dan saludo para todos Hams Ganolos and Azus para Hamzulokwe. First of all, I'd like to say that I like Uncle Ed said, I'm also equally touched to be surrounded by our founding fathers. These are people like the founding fathers of America who are surrounding us this afternoon, and we're privileged for that. Equally commendable also is the foresight, the tenacity and wisdom of these founding fathers, our Chamorro and Carolinian founding fathers, to have etched into stone this wonderful document that I think is very, very enviable and worth emulated by the other parts of the world. My question is, as an ardent person who's interested in the political development of our Commonwealth, especially our generation, the years to come, you have laid the foundation. My question is, to the extent that it is a very enviable document and a wonderful document indeed, are there any areas that are honestly honestly are still need to be fine-tuned, and what they are, and so that we can provide this, what areas should we focus our attention to, so that we can make it a firmer, fine-tune it for our generation to tackle it much easier, instead of being, left dwindling. So, maybe Howard, of course, Howard or Mr. Santos, President Santos.
The basic question is, are there any areas of the government that need to be fine-tuned or could be made better,
Right.
based on the 20
Right.
plus years of experience so far?
Right.
Okay. Anybody who'd like to respond to that? Pete?
Yeah, a couple of things that Howard mentioned earlier, make reference to the report of the Commission on Federal Laws, which was created by the Covenant through the appointment of the President of the United States for members to come from the U.S. and the Northern Marianas. This commission was created, and I was a member of that commission from the very beginning. We did a lot of hard work to review the various kinds of federal laws, and to make recommendations to the Congress as to which laws or regulations should be made applicable and which laws should not be made applicable with respect to the Northern Mariana Islands. I believe that the Congress had enacted only a few of those recommendations, but the purpose for of that commission basically to look at which laws would best suit us and which should not be applied here. And going specifically to our 20 years of experience now, I'll say that some of the laws that we recommended to be studied further and to be even reviewed from the standpoint of their impacts on the development of the islands include things like the U.S. Rivers and Harbors and Navigation Act of 1926, which was applicable in the Northern Marianas, and that has to do with the Corps of Engineers activities, permitting process, and many different monitoring programs that is being conducted by the federal government on environmental issues. I think that particular law needs to be fine-tuned to make sure that it is much more realistically applied here. The laws regarding environmental protection, for example, some of the standards issued in the U.S. To be made applicable in the U.S. continent for that particular environment needs to be adjusted so that we that is, much more relevant out here in the Pacific area. Then there are others. I can recall not specifically what these are, but I would say that as far as fine-tuning the covenant, that review will assist the Commonwealth in moving forward and trying to do things much more efficiently by having more flexible laws and regulations made applicable out here, rather than very rigid federal requirements that in many cases are not realistic. Thank you.
John,
Let me suggest that that question will probably be addressed this afternoon. Howard has suggested that may lead more toward the topic for the afternoon, and that he will have some comments to make on that aspect of the covenant when he makes his presentation this afternoon. Eddie?
I just want to add one aspect of that question that I believe is very relevant to the Commonwealth, and that is the one remaining interest that the Washington office has been pursuing, and that is a representation in the Congress for the people of the Northern Marianas. That has been a difficult challenge that we have not been quite successful, but I think it's one area that needs to be revisited and perhaps pursue quite aggressively. We are the only entity within the American political family that is not represented in the United States Congress. And that has created a number of problems to us, because one of the interests of representation is that when an area is represented, there is a congressional courtesy that a member of a Congress does not intrude into the jurisdiction of another member. And right now, without representation in Congress, we have every Tom, Dick, and Harry looking us in and intruding into our affairs. And I think we should revisit this very, very aggressively, because until such time that we have representation in Congress, you're going to have every member of Congress wanting to interfere in our internal affairs. So I think that's one area that we need to fine-tune. There are, of course, different opinions there among ourselves, and but I think that it's an opportunity that the covenant did allude that an opportunity that can be undertaken in the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me draw things. Do you want to conclude now, Isaac, or do you want to take one more question? It's up to you. You're calling the shots here as far as time. We're right on time now for lunch if we wanted to break now. One more question. All right.
Thank you. There were questions that were presented, and they are interesting questions. Dave answered the EEZ concern, and I agree with him. I participated in the drafting of the economic zones here in the CNMI. Now, there's another question that was raised, and that is how to fine-tune this relationship. And former Lieutenant Governor did mention one of that is the Federal Commission on Federal Laws. Very unfortunate that we did our part. The members appointed to the commission by the United States President and the Governor did their job. They presented the position paper to the United States Congress, but it sat there. I don't think that the United States Congress are really interested or concerned in terms of what were presented. And those are the areas that will help the Commonwealth, this relationship. But they took it, put it on the shelf. If I'm not mistaken, there were two presentations that were made by the Commission on Federal Laws. We haven't got any response from the United States Congress. The other one is, the reason why we have the 902 is for that reason, is to be able to discuss what are the problems of this relationship. And we have tried. I was a member of the 902, and we tried. Unfortunately, people that were appointed to represent the United States President to the talk, 902 talk, they were not taken from the private sectors. They were taken from within the Department of Interior. And that's the major problem, because I don't mind discussing 902 with the Secretary of the Department of Interior. We deserve that level of thought. But we are being given a third-level secretariat who cannot make a decision for the United States government. And worse yet, he takes his advice from the Secretary of Interior. So what were presented in most of the time in the 902 talk were views and position of the Department of Interior. This is the big problems that is faced the Commonwealth. And as long as we will continue to have that, then I don't think that we will have a smooth relationship from here on into the future. The other thing, mind you, the Department of Interior is charged with the responsibility to oversee parks, recreations, you know, the Indian affairs and all these things. And when the people of the Northern Mariana Islands voted to enter into this relationship, they did so because they are tired of the more than 30 years of management by the Department of Interior. The Department of Interior has been failure. They failed in their responsibility to oversee the growth and development of the people of Micronesia. And so we have them. Mind you, we have the same people. We thought that the Commonwealth is a semi-independent, where we may be dealing directly with the office of the state, or, for that matter, the office of the President of the United States, but not the Department of Interior. But we got them back. People that have failed with our infrastructure, people that have failed in our health services system, people that have discriminated on weights and hourly. Remember, there was a lawsuit by the Micronesian. Why should I receive 30 cents an hour? And a person who is from the United States has to receive $3, $4 an hour with the same job category, with the same educational background, with the same experiences. As long as we are under the Department of Interior, meaning as long as the Department of Interior will continue to oversee the administrations of the people of the CNMI, we will continue and maybe worse in this relationship. So the answer to that is to ensure that the President of the United States appointed a person who is not from any branch of the United States government. I will make that recommendation. The people of the CNMI, Dave was right. The aspiration to be a part of the United States was way back since I remember. There was the Terehula and Terelapa. That is correct. Yeah. And I guess that if the late Honorable Mayor Ignacio Binabinti did not challenge the Honorable Mayor Elias Sablan, I don't think that we will get into having two political parties. But that was the creation of the two political parties. And let me just say that it was wrong. One mentioned earlier this morning that I think Sam McPherson did, that number 4 is that the people of the Northern Marianas, they did not want to be a part of Micronesia. That is wrong. There were a strong number of CNMI citizens, Rota, Tinian, and Saipan, that at that time want to be a part of Micronesia. All right? But what was the selling point at that time is the self-government issue, that we will enter into this unique relationship with the United States, but we will continue to maintain our rights as people. Now, the covenant, as I see, is a good document. It's not a perfect document, it's a good document. But like any other laws written, there were oversight. For example, the self-government issue was not clearly defined. Section 103 is not clearly defined. So you have to dig into other sections of the covenant to find out what is your right as a Northern Marianas descent. I have more to say, John, but maybe this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Herman. Would anyone care to respond briefly to what Herman just said? The points that he made? Okay, we will hold that over then until this afternoon, because I think, again, you're talking about an area where there might be some change, and that is what we're going to discuss this afternoon, the future outlook for the covenant and resolving disputes involving the covenant, including those which are quite prominent at the moment between the CNMI and the federal government. So that'll be the topic this afternoon. This has been very well attended this morning, and I would like to urge all of you to come back this afternoon. We will resume here in maybe 1 hour and 5 minutes. So we'll resume at 1:30 this afternoon with another presentation from Mr. Willans, and then more discussion, this time looking to the future of the covenant. Thank you very much. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Let me ask those of you who are still standing to take your seats so that we can get started with the afternoon portion of our program today. And for those of you who are new to our session for this afternoon, let me officially welcome you on behalf of the Commonwealth Council for the Humanities, the sponsor of today's forum, the third in a series of discussions on human rights, indigenous rights, and now the covenant of the CNMI, past, present, and from this point forward for the rest of the afternoon, future. Or I suspect we'll probably go present and future, because we're going to talk about the outlook, and we're also going to talk about resolving conflicts, and perhaps whether there are some better ways than we have had so far of resolving some of the issues. We got into it a little bit this morning with a couple of the questions. We will continue with that this afternoon. Our format is exactly the same as it was this morning, and we will begin with a presentation by the key presenter here today, who was the counsel to the Marianas status team when the negotiations began, and has done a considerable amount of work and research on this unique relationship that was crafted between the United States federal government and the CNMI, namely the covenant, Howard Willans. Before I introduce Mr. Willans formally, let me introduce Rita Enos. She has joined our panel here. Rita, nice to have you with us. Thank you. And also our panelist this afternoon will be the Lieutenant Governor, Jesse Borja, who's going to sit down there, I guess, and come up and join us when the time comes. All right. Each of our panelists will have about 5 to 7 minutes to respond to the presentation after Mr. Willans has completed his talk, and then there will be again an opportunity for some questions from the audience as we conclude the afternoon. So thank you once again for all being here. Thanks for coming back. Most of you did come back this afternoon, and hopefully a few more people will drift in as we begin our presentation. Once again now, Howard Willans.
Thank you, John, and I'd like to thank the members of the panel and the audience for the comments after my statement this morning. It's extremely useful to have questions from the audience, and many of the comments, including those of the former speaker, I think went right to the heart of the issues presented here today, and we've now identified a handful, I think, of very important areas that could be pursued within the context of the covenant to improve the relationship between the United States and the Commonwealth. So I encourage more questions today, and I may be a little bit provocative here to try to encourage you to take me on. It's very difficult, of course, to do what we tried to do this morning, and that is to evaluate the covenant without considering alternative political relationships that the Commonwealth might have considered years ago or consider here today. 25 years ago, the principal alternatives to Commonwealth were free association or independence. And those were options, of course, that were pursued seriously by the other 5 districts. We all know that free association really had no precedent within the American system until the United States agreed ultimately to that kind of relationship with the Republic of the Marshall Islands, Republic of Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia. With respect to considering future alternative status relationships, I have at least one cautionary comment that seems appropriate. Engaging the community, especially one as articulate and politically sophisticated as this one, in a debate about fundamental political status is a lengthy and fatiguing process. We need look no further than Puerto Rico, which for more than 30 years has been debating the relative advantages of Commonwealth, a free association, a statehood, or independence. And for some 30 years, these issues have been hotly debated within the community, and now the focus is on a possible plebiscite to be authorized by Congress. But the point I'm making is that if this community should not enter into a serious commitment to explore free association or independence, in my opinion, unless it is so convinced that the deficiencies in the present relationship are so severe and so beyond remedy that the costly expenditure of time and resources to explore alternatives is necessary. Another comment, by the way, of perhaps cautionary comment, is that whereas 25 years ago the Commonwealth did not have a full range of models to look at when it examined the status question, that is not the case today. Now the Northern Marianas can look at the freely associated states of Micronesia, the Marshalls, and more recently Palau, and it has a variety of other island communities within the Pacific and the Caribbean to look at to see whether any of those communities has a relationship of independence or in an affiliation with a major power that seems more advantageous than the covenant is to the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. Advocates of alternative status relationships, like free association or independence in the Northern Marianas, usually assume that any relationship that the community here desires will be acceptable to the United States. I think that is probably true. I think that if the overwhelming majority of the people in the Northern Marianas decided to renounce their United States citizenship and pursue a course toward independence, the United States over time would agree to that exercise in self-determination. To be sure, it would probably want to have some guarantees by way of treaty with respect to the lease on Tinian and perhaps limited other land interest that it has in the Commonwealth under the covenant. But it is very unlikely that the defense interests that were so prominent 25 years ago are still as prominent here today. It is very unlikely that any strategic or defense interest that the United States currently has in the Northern Marianas would provide the people here with any bargaining leverage if it were to try to use that interest to negotiate an improved political status. As I mentioned this morning, the covenant was negotiated during a period that I would describe as a very narrow window of opportunity at a time when U.S. defense and strategic interests were considered far more important than they are today. Indeed, even in the early 1970s, there was considerable debate within the Defense Department as to the need, from a defense and military perspective, for this Commonwealth agreement with the Northern Marianas. The changing international situation and the changing concepts of military defense and strategy suggest that Micronesia today generally has far less significance to the United States than it did 15 years ago. The forthcoming negotiations with the Federated States of Micronesia may test the accuracy of this assessment. As these cautionary comments and this presentation overall makes clear, I continue to believe that the covenant, with all of its current problems and all of its shortcomings, provide the most desirable alternative for the CNMI in the future. The achievements of the Commonwealth over the past 20 years, in my opinion, confirm the judgment of the Northern Marianas leaders decades ago that a stable relationship with the United States would provide the best foundation for economic development and political growth. If this judgment is reaffirmed by the Northern Marianas community today, then the resources and negotiating skills of the Commonwealth should be directed at resolving the current dispute with the United States regarding the immigration and minimum wage laws. Let me turn to that issue now. The overview of the covenant, as reflected on the chart, provides a useful perspective as to these current difficulties. We have to assess the cost of successful efforts to find an amicable resolution that is acceptable to both the United States and the Commonwealth, with the benefits that the Commonwealth has achieved and will continue to benefit from under the relationship. I happen to be very familiar with one of the more skilled and creative mediators in the United States. I live with her. And if she or another mediator were assigned to work out the differences with the United States, Interior Department in particular, and the Commonwealth, a mediator might take this position. Mediation, after all, is designed to bring parties together in some intermediate ground after telling each of them in private that their case has no merit and that there are advantages to compromise here that are far better to achieve than to go to court or to reach some a final breach in the relationship, whether it be domestic, commercial, or political. So if one were to take the Interior Department into a room, so to speak, a large room, to be sure, these are some things that an aggressive mediator might say bluntly to the Interior Department. Number one, accept federal responsibilities. There is no disagreement between the Commonwealth and the federal government as to the need for aggressive, well-staffed law enforcement efforts in the United States, by the United States, in the Northern Marianas. In the areas of drugs, organized crime, and labor violations, federal law enforcement agencies could enforce those responsibilities much more aggressively in the future than they have in the past. In addition, the extent to which some of the problems in the Commonwealth identified by the Interior involve significant numbers of unemployed Micronesians from other districts, the United States should accept responsibility for assisting financially and otherwise the Commonwealth in dealing with this particular aspect of the problem, requiring the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas and Guam and others to go to court to enforce the financial responsibilities that the United States assumed under the compacts strikes me as a failure in the United States' recognition of its own responsibilities. The second point I would make, please take the time to understand the covenant's negotiating history. It is true that during the covenant negotiations, there was concern within the Political Status Commission and the community at large about large numbers of alien workers and families in the community. But it was recognized by everyone on the negotiating commission and in the community, quote, that the present small population base cannot provide the labor force needed for significant economic development. Controlled immigration into the Marianas will be necessary if we are to attain our economic goals, period, end quote. That was from a statement handed across the table to the U.S. delegation in May of 1973. By way of defining these economic goals, the negotiators for the Northern Marianas provided a table to the U.S. representatives projecting a growth in the overall population in the Northern Marianas. With very limited data at hand, with the advice of our very talented economist, the Marianas negotiators suggested to the United States that the population was likely to grow from about 14,000 people, which it was in 1973, to an estimated 24,000 people in 1981, and that this would include a growth in alien workers from about 1,500 to 7,500 by 1981, an increase of 400%. In other words, to achieve the economic goals that the Marianas negotiators aspired and advocated in the negotiations, they contemplated a growth in alien workers of 400% in a period of about 7 years in order to support the tourism and other industries that the Commonwealth hoped to develop. And furthermore, they anticipated that the private sector in 1981 would employ about 7,100 people, of whom some 5,000 would be aliens. That is a percentage of about 72%. In other words, the limited population here, and as the panel members have pointed out, the predominant share of the local population was under 16. So the labor force was a very limited labor force, and there could be no economic growth, much less the economic growth desired by the negotiators, unless there was this very substantial reliance on alien laborers. Although there was discussion during the negotiations about the rate of growth assumed by both parties and the corresponding size of the U.S. financial commitment, the United States representatives never took issue with the Northern Marianas' view that significant reliance on alien laborers was necessary in order to achieve the higher standard of living desired by both sets of negotiators. So that's the second point I would make to the Interior Department. Understand the covenant's negotiating history. Do not try to distort it. Accept it, and if there are changing circumstances, let's try to work within the expectations as well as the language of the covenant, because a deal is a deal. And this was a negotiated contract of a unique character, and the fact that it was negotiated and it was agreed to, not only by the U.S. Negotiating delegation, but by the United States Congress, gives the Commonwealth, in my opinion, great force in dealing with any set of current problems with the federal government. The third point I would make is somewhat related. It is that the United States ought to take the time and make the effort to acknowledge the unique aspects of small island economies. More than 30 years ago, the Solomon Mission visited the Trust Territory. Whenever anyone here refers to the Solomon Mission, they usually say the infamous Solomon Mission. Now, however infamous it may be viewed by the people in the community or the young Micronesians that exposed it in 1971, the fact is it was an extremely thoughtful and perceptive analysis of at least the economic conditions and potential here in the Northern Marianas. So far as the Solomon Mission was concerned, it felt that the other Micronesian districts were perhaps sustainable as traditional island communities, but not sustainable in the modern world, except for the possible exception of the Northern Marianas. With limited natural resources, small populations, often regular and devastating storms, the Pacific Islands have enormous obstacles to developing a self-sufficient and growing economy. Few Pacific Islands provide any kind of model of economic success. The recent Bank of Hawaii report on American Samoa, for example, indicated that about 90% of the workers in the 2 canneries there are aliens, that some 75% of the workers in the single garment factory there are aliens, and that nearly 1/2 of the American Samoan population over 16 is unemployed because of the lack of opportunities in the private sector. Now, this level of economic development may be acceptable to American Samoans and to the Department of the Interior, but it doesn't seem acceptable here, and it seems unwise to tamper too quickly with economic principles and precepts that have produced far more economic growth and a much higher level of employment here in the Northern Marianas. If the Interior Department has an economic model at hand, prepared by professional economists, that reflects real-world experience, and that ensures maintenance of steady economic growth and high standards of living in the Northern Marianas without substantial reliance on alien laborers, then it should put that model in the public domain so it can be explained, defended, critiqued. And I suggest that that's a challenge that one can reasonably put to the Interior Department or any other federal agency that is suggesting that the principles of economic development here in the Northern Marianas must be altered because it has yielded a product that's inconsistent with either the covenant or with American values. The fourth comment I would make to the Interior Department is that it should respect the principle of self-government. The legitimate interest, federal interest in the Northern Marianas do not necessarily dictate a particular outcome with respect to the pace of economic growth and the reliance on alien laborers. To some considerable extent, the people of each insular area should be free to make their own decisions in these respects. This was recognized during the covenant negotiations when the U.S. representative stated, quote, "However, the real incentives, the real initiative, the real planning, and the real responsibility for the realization or non-realization of your economic goals will be in your hands. You will have the power to make decisions that will affect the nature, the direction, and the pace of your own economic development. You will have to take into account the impact of your development policies on your environment, on the ecology of the island, and on the quality of life of your people," end quote. We could not have written a finer statement ourselves. And it's that kind of respect for self-government that we need to stand firmly behind, to urge politely but firmly in any negotiations with the federal government as to the current issues or any future issues. The last and fifth comment I would pass on to the Interior Department, if I were ever invited the opportunity, would be to put personalities aside. The current difficulties between the Commonwealth and Interior relating to minimum wage and immigration policies are long-standing. Many different administrations in the Commonwealth have been in office as these problems developed and efforts were made to resolve them. It serves no useful purpose to define the dispute in terms of any particular Commonwealth officials. Now, having left the Interior behind to reflect carefully and sensitively to these 5 admonitions, I then cross the hall and enter the room where there are Commonwealth officials sitting eagerly to await such wise counsel. And to them, I have 5 things to say as well. First, respect legitimate federal interest. There are legitimate federal interests at stake in the ongoing discussions between the Commonwealth and the federal government. They range from federal expenditure for infrastructure to competitive concerns of mainland-based enterprises, to foreign policy concerns of how the United States is perceived as treating third country nationals. The capacity of the federal government to enforce U.S. laws in the Commonwealth may also be adversely affected by the lack of proper information or controls within the Commonwealth government. Open acknowledgement by the Commonwealth of these federal concerns and the Commonwealth's need to respond to them is a very important step toward their resolution. And too often, in my opinion, Commonwealth officials would rather not accept the validity of some of these federal interests. If you're part of the United States, then these federal interests have to be assessed and given proper deference as you proceed to try to solve the problems. The second point I would make is that the Commonwealth ought to adopt a substantive and nonpartisan response to these federal concerns. At various times, the Commonwealth has begun to implement programs addressed to these federal concerns, but too often they have been limited in scope, slow to be implemented, and influenced by partisan political rivalries within the Commonwealth. Many of the proposals contained in the recent report of the Interior Department deserve careful attention. And in the absence of better alternatives, many of them should probably be adopted.
A coherent and comprehensive program should be implemented to address the immigration and minimum wage problems identified by Interior's report, because it is what the Commonwealth needs and deserves. My third message to the Commonwealth is to use a long-term perspective. The Commonwealth's response to the Interior Department should, to the extent possible, contain and be based on an assessment of the long-term interest of its citizens. There are many in the Commonwealth who are concerned with the pace of economic development and the impact of such growth on the local community. The recent Bank of Hawaii report on the Commonwealth pointed out that the competitive advantages that the garment industry achieves by location in the Commonwealth will most probably disappear in the years ahead. At the very least, the Commonwealth should plan for such an eventuality. One has to assess the realism of the garment industry, or the clothing industry, as we might call it, to survive the changing rules under GATT and other international agreements and continue to find attractive its location here in the Commonwealth. If the Commonwealth advisors assess this possibility and recognize that the garment industry will phase itself out inevitably by the economics at play, then it seems as though the Commonwealth should not sacrifice the benefits that flow from its relationship with the United States to preserve that industry. Now, I do not know whether the Bank of Hawaii assessment and projection is accurate or not, but I think it's a sufficiently important point that the Commonwealth leaders and its advisors would want to look hard at whether or not the garment industry or any other industry provides a long-term a basis for the Commonwealth's continued economic growth. The Commonwealth should not assume that its economy 10 years from now will look the same as it does today. The garment industry may have different technology and objectives. There may be other industries attracted to the Commonwealth. Everyone knows that diversity in the economy is a desired objective. One of the regrets that comes from not having a military establishment on Tinian is that that military establishment would have provided an alternative source of government revenues for the Commonwealth in its early years. But whatever decisions are made by the Commonwealth, taking this long view perspective into account, it's going to be necessary for the Commonwealth's political leaders to conduct a public education program that explains and justifies its approach to the current problem. There is probably no cost-free resolution of the current differences with the federal government. The fourth point I would make to the Commonwealth is that it basically has to honor its commitments. A fair reading of Interior's recent report, especially in comparison with the assessment of the situation in mid-1994, suggests that the Commonwealth's failure to implement certain undertakings in 1994 and 1995, and more recently, contributed to Interior's recommendation to the President. When the Commonwealth promises to implement programs in response to federal concerns and then fails to do so, there are almost certainly going to be consequences attached to that failure. Even if there are good reasons for the change in the approach, a departure from previous commitments has to be explained in a way that justifies the action that the Commonwealth wishes to take. After some 20 years of Commonwealth status under the Covenant, Commonwealth officials must be prepared to deal with federal officials forthrightly, just as they want federal officials to deal forthrightly with them. And my fifth comment to the Commonwealth is the same as my comment to Interior. Put personalities aside. The current dispute with the federal government is not the personal vendetta of any individual Interior Department employee. The problem has developed over a long period of time, and the Interior Department has been, in my opinion, very patient with the Commonwealth's efforts to address the issues that concern the department. The Commonwealth needs to respect the federal employees who have been charged by Congress with the mission of providing oversight and advising Congress with respect to the insular areas. A proposal for the new administration is something I'd like to end up with in my presentation this afternoon. The new administration that takes office in January will be faced with many important challenges. One of those, of course, relates to the current federal proposal to eliminate the Commonwealth's control over immigration and minimum wage. Congressional hearings are scheduled early in 1998 to consider these proposals. Whether the Commonwealth likes it or not, the U.S. Congress, through its committees, will be evaluating the situation and serving in effect as a mediator to decide whether any resolution of these competing interests is possible, short of the extreme measures being urged by the executive branch. If the Commonwealth is committed to a vigorous defense of these covenant provisions, it needs to develop a comprehensive program that provides an alternative to Interior's approach. It needs to acknowledge legitimate federal interest. It needs to be substantive and nonpartisan. It needs to reflect a long-term perspective, and it needs to make commitments that will be honored by the Commonwealth. Any such program must have broad support in the community. One way to develop such a program would be to establish a Governor's Advisory Commission on Commonwealth-federal government relations. Creation of such a commission would acknowledge the importance of this challenge to the covenant. Like the Marianas Political Status Commission of 25 years ago, the commission would draw its members from both political parties, from the legislature, from the business community, and from the different islands. The Advisory Commission would be instructed to make recommendations to the governor and the legislature within a relatively brief period of time, perhaps 2 to 4 months. It would be directed to review the issues, to consult with Commonwealth personnel and advisors, to conduct such public hearings as it thinks advisable, and to deliberate in private regarding the measures and strategies that it wishes to recommend to the elected leaders of the Commonwealth. The goal would be a series of actions by the Commonwealth that address the federal government and its principal concerns, but protect the Commonwealth's interest in a diverse and dynamic economy. Now, why an advisory commission? As one who's worked for not one but 2 presidential commissions, I recognize the skepticism with which the designation of a commission is often received. To many, it is looked on as a vehicle for avoiding decision. To some, it is looked for as a vehicle for buying time. But to others, it may be looked for as a useful way to address this particular set of problems. Here are some reasons why I think an advisory commission in this context might be useful. First, the new administration will necessarily be preoccupied with the daily business of governing, the appointment and confirmation of new officials, the preparation of a balanced budget at a troublesome time, and the customary mix of new legislative proposals. In contrast, an advisory commission can give its full and undiluted attention to the challenges presented by the legislation now pending before the U.S. Congress. Now, it goes without saying that a commission is not going to be effective unless its members work substantially on the matter and unless there are full-time staff assigned to work with the members of the commission. But if the resources are there, an advisory commission provides a means for addressing these problems that has some advantages over leaving it to the current elected leaders of the Commonwealth. Second, an advisory commission with its diverse membership can help to ensure that its recommendations will have widespread support within the community. Now, we can fully expect that any meaningful program to deal with these proposals and make proposals to deal with these problems will have its critics. But an advisory committee will be able to hear all the competing views, to evaluate their persuasive force, and to make informed judgments about how best to articulate and defend the Commonwealth's interest over the long term. Third, the use of an advisory commission will ensure a measure of openness to its deliberations and recommendations that may help enlist the necessary community support. The key word today is transparency. And too often the policies are developed in the Northern Marianas in secret and without input from the interested sectors of the community. The advisory commission would help to deal with these problems in a much more open fashion. The Commonwealth's relations with the federal government are too important to be left solely to its elected leaders, to be left solely to the business community, to be left solely to the academicians, and certainly to be left alone to the lawyers and the consultants. All must be engaged in the process. The use of an advisory commission does not guarantee, of course, that an effective program can be framed to respond to the challenges facing the Commonwealth, but it will dramatize the Commonwealth's determination to defend the covenant, its conviction that solutions can be found to accommodate the various interests involved, and its willingness to depart from the ordinary way of doing business in order to meet this challenge. In facing the challenges of today with respect to the covenant, the Northern Marianas people might do well to emulate those leaders of both parties whose perseverance led to the successful negotiation of the covenant. I wish I had the time to exchange anecdotes with you about my relations with the members of the commission who sit here today and those who are no longer with us. There never was a more dedicated, harder working group with a common mission to pursue, and a sense that they had the need to make an historic decision of a kind that few people truly have the capacity to make. And they stood up to that a challenge, a day in and day out over more than 2 years. Theirs was a nonpartisan and persistent effort rooted in the desires of the people for a secure political relationship that would enable them and their children to enjoy lives rich in opportunity for political development and personal growth. I'm confident that today's leaders are no less capable in resolving the issues before them to the full satisfaction of the people of this unique and constantly evolving member of the American political family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Howard. We're going to break from the morning's pattern this afternoon. We will have the comments and response from our panel members before we take a break, and then we will have community or audience participation and questions and answers after a short break. So we'll get to that in just a moment. Before we do, though, I would like to point out once again that there is an evaluation sheet in your folder, which we would appreciate it if you would fill out, and also if any of you would like a copy of Mr. Willen's presentation, please put your name and address for mailing that copy at the bottom of the sheet, and that will be provided to you by the council. So if you'd like a copy of the presentation, they will be made available. For consideration in the next few minutes now, for our panel to consider and also for you in the audience to consider, here are some suggested questions to which you might want to respond as you formulate a response or comment on Howard Willen's presentation on the future outlook for the covenant. Should the CNMI be looking seriously at alternatives to the covenant or working to improve the relationship with the federal government under the covenant? Is free association an attractive alternative to the covenant? Is independence an attractive alternative to the covenant? In Mr. Willen's discussions of the current differences regarding the immigration and minimum wage, was he too critical of the federal government? Was he too critical of the Commonwealth? Do you think these differences could be resolved without the need to take away the Commonwealth's control over immigration and minimum wage? And finally, what do you think of his proposal for an advisory committee or commission to help the new administration deal with these issues? Those are the questions that I pose to you to think about, and also to our panelists. Our distinguished panel will now respond to the presentation by Mr. Willens, and I'd like to begin by inviting the Lieutenant Governor of the CNMI, the Honorable Jesse Borja, to make the first comments. Sir?
Thank you, John. I have the dubious honor of leading the afternoon panel discussion. First of all, I'd like to thank the Council for the Humanities for inviting me to be a part of this forum. The covenant has always been of special interest to me, and it will continue to have special interest for me, because it is, as has been stated earlier, is the document that governs our relationship with the federal government. Listening to the speakers, the panelists this morning, listening to Howard's presentation, both this morning and this afternoon. I was trying to come up in my own mind as to how I could share some of my thoughts that may be of benefit, especially to the students that I see in the audience. And I'm afraid I failed you because I haven't come up with a program that may perhaps assist you, but perhaps my rambling thoughts may be of some use or may trigger some in the audience and some panel members here, and Mr. Howard Willans perhaps also to take issue with some of the statements that I will be making. To me, the covenant is, let me take it a step further than what has been used, the word used earlier. It's a great document. It's not only a good document, it's a great document in my opinion. It's a document that, as has been stated, that has been arrived at by really a vision, a dream of our negotiators, and I'm honored that some of them are here. As Howard stated, this kind of a relationship didn't exist. And the kind of relationship that our negotiators were looking at, they admitted to the United States negotiators that what exists is not acceptable. They had to come up with creative, innovative, imaginative ideas of how the relationship between us, and I still maintain our sovereignty also initially, and the federal government. A relationship that would be mutually beneficial. At the same time, giving us much local autonomy to the people, our people, because our negotiators thought that that was a wise thing, the best thing for our people. This morning, a question was asked as to how can we better the covenant. Is there a particular provision in there that should be changed? I looked at my files here. I have a file on the covenant, and I looked at the table of contents with regard to every particular provision in the covenant. And like somebody said, I think it was Ed, who said that perhaps the only provision in there is with regard to the Washington rep. Maybe that would be the only one. But I'm not willing to say that that's the only one. You know, documents are made by people, human beings, and there's always room for improvement. There may be other provisions in there that should be changed. I don't know. The lawyers that I see in the audience will remember that when the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure first came out, there were commentaries, comments by professors and legal scholars that that was the best rules in existence, and you couldn't change it, but there have been some changes to it. So change, I think, is good, it's inevitable, and there may be provisions that need to be changed within our own covenant. But I agree with Ed that the provision with regard to the Washington representative should be looked at again and should be discussed again with the federal government. I remember the late Philip Burton during the negotiations when a statement, I'm sorry, I think it was after the negotiations. I was still in law school during the negotiations. But after the negotiations, when I had the privilege and honor to work alongside with Mr. Burton, when I was on the Federal Laws Commission also, when he made the statement that the only reason that provision is worded the way it is because there was no way that he could have convinced the United States Congress to have allowed for the Northern Marianas to have a delegate in the United States Congress. But times have changed. Maybe now the United States Congress may be amenable to a change to allow us to have a delegate in the United States Congress. The advice that Howard theoretically presented to us as to what he would give if he were a mediator, they're all good, Howard. And I hope the officials in the federal government and our leaders, the new administration that will be coming in also, and if there's going to be an advisory commission, whoever's on that advisory commission will take heed of your advice. They are certainly points that have to be addressed, they have to be considered, and they should be heeded, I believe. Of the 5 points to the United States, the one point perhaps that I would mention as perhaps being not as strong as the other advice that the other 4, would be with regard to the understanding of the negotiating history. I see the value there, Howard, but I, for one, will tell you that I don't think anybody in the United States side or in the Commonwealth side or any observer here in the Commonwealth or in the United States or elsewhere really knew the economic development that's going to happen here. You mentioned statistics, 400% increase projection. Well, I don't know, somebody here perhaps has a better handle on the statistics, but from 1972, 73 to 1981, you say there's the projection was a 400% increase. I don't know whether that was met or it was below in 1981, because my recollection is that the boom in the Commonwealth started towards the latter part of the 80s. And that's when I think the non-resident workers, their numbers exploded. Prior to that, it was not that great of an increase. And I think also the argument may be made, Howard, that perhaps they were aware of the projection, the 400% increase, but that 400% increase would not have meant a non-resident worker population that exceeded the resident population. It would have still been below U.S. citizens' population here in the Commonwealth. So that, I can just anticipate that kind of an argument from the U.S. side if you give that kind of an advice to them. Before I continue on, let me make mention also of the Solomon mission that you mentioned, and I wanted to do this because that has a special place in my own memory also. And that's because the decedent Cisco Uludong and I were arguing that the value or the purpose of that. You mentioned the Solomon mission. I understand it to be the Solomon Report. And that, in your prepared statement also, you say, you put it in a way that is new to me, because you state that the Solomon mission, the report, the idea came out that let's educate the Micronesians, because when you educate them, they will see the value of a democracy, especially the American democracy, and therefore would vote for it in a plebiscite. That's a nice way of putting it, because when I was growing up, Cisco and I used to argue that the Solomon Report came out with a report saying, let's educate the Micronesians so that they would be addicted to the American system and therefore would not be able to choose any other type of government. That's my recollection of the Solomon Report. With regard to your advice to the Commonwealth government, they're all very good. I agree with them. And I've always stated that with regard to that one particular concern of ours right now, with regard to the takeover or the attempted takeover, immigration, the application of the minimum wage, we have to understand, as I believe, Howard, you stated, there was a panel member that stated it also quite briefly and to the point, and that is that it's not a question of power, because the power is clearly in the covenant. It states what the power is. It's whether it should be used, it should be changed. That's what we have to convince the federal government of. We have to justify our argument that these two particular provisions are a major part of the reason why the economic development of the Commonwealth is as it is. And to change it would mean certain drastic adverse effects. And those are the things that we have to tell the federal side, so that they would agree with us that no, now is not the time to use the power. Advisory Commission, I'd go along with that, but I still am convinced that 902 is more important. And the reason I say that, Howard, is, and I've stated it to you earlier, is that there are fundamental differences in philosophy between the United States and us here in the Commonwealth, huh? And this fundamental difference came to fore, I believe, when Al Stamen, the director of OIA, came here just, I believe, before the elections, and told us that it's not acceptable at all for the United States government to see a U.S. territory, insular area, where the political power is in the minority. And I think the only way you can try to compromise on that basic philosophical difference is through 902. We're going to have to convince the federal government, and it's going to be, I know it's going to be a difficult job, but we're going to have to show them that even in the labor history of the United States, when the United States saw that it was to its advantage, to its benefit, to make exceptions to its own labor laws, it did so when it came to migrant workers. Why can't we be as innovative, as creative, as when we were negotiating the covenant with regard to this basic philosophical difference also? We can be. That's why I also agree with your advice on realism. Yes, let's look at the covenant, let's look to the future, but realistically. But do not forget also to have dreams. Just like our negotiators had dreams when they negotiated the covenant. Because if they were very realistic at that time, perhaps you as counsel at that time would have told them, hey, get real. You know, there's no such relationship as what you're going after right now, and we're not going to get anywhere because the United States Congress and the executive branch are never going to agree to what you're asking. So we have to have a vision also, a dream. Who knows, for example, maybe we should be satisfied with a delegate this time. Who knows, maybe all of the insular areas may get together and get exactly what states are also getting. Why not? Well, those are my comments, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here again. Did I exceed my time?
That's all right. Yeah, I will caution everybody else. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Governor Borja. The allotted time for each panelist is 5 to 7 minutes. So now having had the Lieutenant Governor's comments, the allotted time for the remaining panelists is 3 to 5 minutes. We're going to call next on the chairman once again of the negotiating team from the Mariana Islands, then the District of the Marianas in the Trust Territory, back when this process began 25 years ago, to make his comments and remarks on the future outlook for the Commonwealth. Eddie Pangilinan.
There has never been a time that a real and serious challenge has confronted the Commonwealth. And whether we like it or not, a challenge has been presented to us, which perhaps the incoming governor-elect is going to inherit. And it's a serious one, because we are finding a challenge to the integrity of the covenant as well as self-government. And it is a matter that has been elevated from the administration level, where discussion and justification, as Howard pointed out, maybe now is not available to us. The matter has been elevated to the congressional, the legislative process, and the venue has shifted dramatically. There are recommendations from the President of the United States to the Senate and the House of Representatives that action has been should be taken to modify the covenant and to impose control of immigration in the hand of the federal government, as well as minimum wage. This is a matter that we need to address very seriously, because it's confronting us. And I think it would be remiss on our part to lay blame on what happened. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and start to address issues that may be a speculative one. But now we are confronted with a serious challenge, and it is one that we need to have a community involvement, as well as a real understanding of what course of action we have to take in order to either delay the action that has been confronted us, or stop it altogether, or find solution that may well be in our best interests. In the covenant under 503, the authority to modify the immigration control as well as minimum wage is there, and that's where we are now, where we are. I think the incoming governor is going to face this problem, and I think all of us will be affected one way or the other. We have opportunities to ensure that the course of action that we take over the short term as well as the long term may be one that we can have some limited control. One is that since the discussion and the venue has shifted to the Congress, there is a procedural way that we can stop completely or delay legislation. In Congress, as you probably know, there are 7,000 legislation that are introduced every year. Out of that, maybe 300-400 get to the president's desk for signature. There are two legislation now before the Congress, one with Senator McCuskey in the Senate, and in the past we have been well exposed with the George Miller House bill that has been a source of controversy as well as a challenge to the covenant. I think that we need to address how our leadership, especially the legislature, the governor, and the community, will have to develop a course of action that we need to address this issue. And I fear that time is not in our time is becoming short, and that if we delay action here, we find ourselves where the Congress is going to start moving through its legislative process, and we're going to find ourselves holding the back, and the legislation is going to move forward. Fortunately for us, I think there is some sentiment now in Congress that the incoming governor should be given I think some time to address this issue. We understand that a committee from the House of Representatives is going to be visiting us in February on a fact-finding mission, and there were our leadership and our people would have to present some very strong and persuasive argument as to the course of action that is before the U.S. Congress. I think that this is the most critical time that we need to really get all the leaders that are now going to be running the new government, and to develop comprehensive course of action, either for a certain period, in the event that this legislation are going to move forward quickly. We know that in any legislation, introduction is one of the process. It has to go to the committee for review and course of action. Then it goes to the floor for the consideration of the bill, and then it goes to the Senate. The Senate will have to move the process the way it is, and there will be time for resolution in the event that there's some changes in either the House or the Senate. A conference has to be taking place. This take time. Unfortunately, I think we have some luxury there. We're looking at the timetable. We may be able to undertake some action that either delay it or present an argument that would stop completely this kind of course of action. Also, we understand that there are ways, there are avenues, there are opportunities that we can exert. In the past, during the current administration, they have embarked on a serious lobbying effort to undertake a restraint on the congressional action. And I must say that that has worked, because although legislation has been introduced, no action has been taken. Whether or not we can continue to undertake this kind of opportunity, it's really up to the new leadership of our new government. Secondly, in the event that we want to address the issue as Howard has presented to us, I think that it's time for us to face reality and understand that we do have responsibilities in this relationship, as well as there are interests that Howard's already pointed out. We also have serious interests, and whether or not the survival of the Commonwealth, if these two items are taken away from us, would enable the Northern Marianas government to survive the course of action in the future. So those are the challenges that we find ourselves. There is an immediate action that our new government would have to take. It has to open up a real dialogue with the other branches of the government, especially the legislature, to come up with a comprehensive course of action as to how to address this issue. Because it's before us now. I think the two bills, one in the House and one in the Senate, is going to move forward. And fortunately for next year is a congressional year in Washington. The time frame of the Congress is going to be limited. members of the Senate, as well as especially the House, will be going home for re-election. Right now, the Congress is in recess until after the holidays. Then we'll come back for final session in terms of activities that have to be undertaken. So we have a window of opportunity here for the leadership of the new administration to come together, meet with the leadership of the legislature, and address this issue. There are opportunities that Howard has pointed out. Maybe an advisory committee will be in a time frame that could come up with some serious recommendation. On the other hand, we also have another entity within our government, and that is the Office of the Washington Representative. We have, that office has been established under the covenant as well as our Constitution to be the eye and the ears of our people. And that office has existed for the duration of the covenant. And that office has a very articulate, very strong personality who is familiar with all the players within the Congress, and one that can advise the governor and work together closely with the governor as well as the legislature to implement a course of action that would either, like I said, delay the process of the federal takeover or stop it completely. But this is the kind of a challenge that we're facing with. And I fear that if we exercise our normal course of business, that it's well, yeah, there's a problem, but let's just devote our attention to other matters. It may catch us, and it's going to affect us very seriously, because without these two provisions in the covenant, we're going to lose the integrity of our self-government. These two issues has played a very critical role in our development. Granted, there are some allegations in the report of the Interior Department as to why we have reached this situation right now. We can debate the merit of those, but the fact of the matter is that we are being challenged, and it is incumbent upon us now to defend ourselves. How we go about it would take a lot of good counseling, good advice, and I think a commitment on our part to address this issue seriously and to be able to present a recommendation to Congress. This is where the battleground is now. And short of addressing it in the Congress, we may find ourselves greatly affected. I just want to share this in a short time. There are other points, but we're somewhat limited in our representation. But I want to just share with you that these are some concern that I, as a private citizen, looking into the challenges that we find ourselves. And I hope that the collective wisdom of our leaders and those of us, especially all of us here, is going to affect everyone individually, whether we like it or not. And this is a matter that has no political boundaries. It's going to affect the people of the Northern Marianas, the government of the Northern Marianas, and it has a very strong consequences that I don't think we can afford to overlook it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pangilinan. I will invite the next presenter to come up and take a somewhat different order here, just to vary the things a little bit. Sam McFeeters was last this morning. I'll invite him to make a presentation now in the middle, and I'm going to stand up after 5 minutes.
Thanks, John. I don't think I'll need the 5 minutes because the first two speakers have said pretty much what I wanted to say in the first place. It's really quite an honor to be on this panel, and I thank you for bringing me in here, Isaac. A couple of things that came to mind on this afternoon's thing, and that is, I've heard the P word in capitals. And this is a word I don't let my students use, because it's so common among consenting adults here. They talk about it but never do anything about it. And that's planning. I've heard Howard talk about it. I've heard Eddie talk about it. Lieutenant Governor talked about it. And it's time to really sit down and say, where do we want to go from here? That's one of the biggest problems that we have right now. We're going every which way, but we don't know where it's going to wind up. I could look at the statistics on non-resident workers and hotel construction, garment industries, and in the past 2 years, they have exploded. How much further? How much more? How much is enough? It benefits whom? These are questions that need to be asked in the context of the covenant. And I say that particularly because in reading the Interior reports, many of those reports cite the increase in social problems, crime, other social problems. I am a chairman of the Governor's Council on Food and Nutrition. The studies that we have generated concerning the health of the local population, these are frightening. And a lot of them have to do with the development and the directions that it's taken. These are things that need to be dealt with. And I guess the one word I would have here is we have to recognize that there are problems. And we have to recognize that most of these problems start and can be ended right here. One of the things that has characterized our past dialogue with Washington is everybody's pointing fingers. And nobody's sitting down and saying, hey, let's do something about this problem, as painful as it may be. And I think if a commission were to be formed, and its sole purpose was to identify these problems and recommend solutions, we would have come a long way. Now, in terms of whether or not the covenant should be changed or anything like that, my recommendation or my feeling is that there's nothing to be gained by changing it. And I would also like to point out in concluding that while the covenant provided for U.S. citizenship, at the time it was being negotiated, there were opponents who were afraid that if they became U.S. citizens, they would lose their connections with particularly the Carolinians, with their home islands in the Carolines. So a provision was added to the covenant which allowed anyone who did not want to become a citizen to become a U.S. national. Now, while national doesn't have much going for it, not a single person in the history of the Commonwealth has rejected U.S. citizenship in favor of U.S. nationality. I think that's very significant. Thank you.
Well done, Mr. McPheeters. Pete, you're going to get the last word because I'm going to invite the lady to speak first before you get your chance. I'd like to ask Rita Enos to come up now for her comments in reaction to the presentation by Mr. Willans, keeping in mind where we are and where we're going, looking at the future outlook for the covenant.
John told me I have 30 minutes. Good afternoon, distinguished guests. Of course, I have to acknowledge and appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to be here among very distinguished forefathers. And I don't claim to be a political scientist, but after all, there is room for an educator in this agenda, of which I'm very proud of. I'd like to acknowledge Mrs. Borja, who's sitting here and joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon. You know, there's so many things that I'd like to say, and so many things that I'd like to suggest and add to the discussion, but I think the richness of our conversation this afternoon could be caused by the audience really asking the questions that are foremost in their minds. The question that I did not ask this morning due to time limitation was that as I sat next to a very distinguished gentleman and a traditional Carolinian leader, I leaned towards his ears and looked up at the panelists here, and I wondered, had there been women from the islands participating in the political status negotiation, what the future or what today would look like? I still wonder, and I still would like to have an informal conversation with our forefathers to see where the women played a role. And of course, I know where. In the tradition of our cultures here, both Carolinian and Chamorro, I know that they were very strong at home. So I'm wondering what of those, of the discussions that they brought home, what were influenced by the women of the community. And I know that Howard mentioned the airport organized gathering by women, and I'm really encouraged. It's time to take stock of where we are. And as an educator, I think we need a lot of education on both sides. Both sides of the world. I think in the US continent, we could still have room for understanding the small island nation that we have here, and also knowing more about the intricacies of our conditions here as the people wish to, and I'm sure our forefathers brought the conversation to Washington, D.C. in themselves, not necessarily maybe in the translation and their use of English in the second language, but I'm sure the richness of what they want to bring home was in the intermediate discussions while they were allowed to speak in the Chamorro, or I'd say Chamorro because I didn't think they were speaking in Carolinian then, Chamorro language. My whole emphasis and discussion for thinking about let's take stock and the purpose for evaluation is to ask ourselves the question, for what purpose did we start the negotiation? Did we achieve that? I wondered if we also asked the question of a vision that we had, a vision that we still have, I'm sure, for a better livelihood for our people here in the Commonwealth, then the Northern Marianas. We asked the question of what do we want, and we proceeded on with what do we want. Did we ask what do we mean? In looking at what we want, being a US citizen, what did we mean by that? I'm sure our people didn't really understand what we mean, or maybe we did. I was immersed with linguists and cultural anthropologists at the time that the negotiations were going on, so of course, my thinking of the time was of that, the identity of the people of the islands, Rota, Tinian, CNMI in general, Saipan, and the Northern Islands. Where will we be, and how will we be interacting? Today, we question ourselves. Do we still belong? Where is our voice in the negotiations? And where are we heading? I'm scared because I see around me that as a result of our very ambitious goals for economic development, I see a lot of loss in those that we cherish and we value. And I hope that whoever gets to participate in the cutting of the 21st century dreams and realities for our people, that identity, those that anchor us to these islands, the very small rocks that we live in, will consider the identity as an issue. Language in the midst of development. Our peoplehood in the midst of development. A discussion on nationhood, Chamorro Nation or Carolinian Nation, is that still possible today? I wonder, because there's so many Chamorros elsewhere other than the CNMI. And if we take a look at the population today in the CNMI, particularly here in the main island of Saipan, what's the configuration right now? And what are the voices that are most loud? And whose voices are really heard? Let me just take us back. I guess in answer to some of the questions, I'd like to take us back to a statement that Howard mentioned, May 23rd, 1973 statement by US on the Statement on Economics and Finance, where it says you will have to take into account the impact of your development policies on your environment, on the ecology of the island, and the quality of life of your people. I like to consider that the quality of life of our people is not merely the homes that we built, the decorations that we're able to fill our yards and our homes, but also the quality of life of the people that till the soil here, that really call this home. I'd like to leave this discussion by just suggesting, in looking at Howard's contribution to the discussion today, education as a key component to this, the US continent on our Commonwealth, Do they know what they should know about the Commonwealth, and how should we begin to impact that kind of knowledge, or begin to emerge that kind of knowledge? Also, on our side here is really the education of our people on citizenry, sorry, what a U.S. citizen is all about, living in a U.S. democracy. At the same time, I appreciate the fact that our forefathers actually took away from the paradigm of what U.S. citizenship might look like, and what our self-government might look like, by moving away from a territory type of a status to that of no template. There was no template really that was followed in terms of creating our Commonwealth. It was purely based on a vision of our forefathers and the interest of our people here, and thus we were creating our way. And so it's expected that we will have some turbulent times, and as a researcher on change, I'd like to say that this is to be expected. Right now it's very uncomfortable, but I'd like to say that we are in the process of change. We are people also in the process of change, and as such, we need to acknowledge that there will be periods of time when we will be uncomfortable about the things that are important to us. But it is at this time when we're most uncomfortable with that we need to stop, and we need to regroup, and we need to take stock and move forward. So, what are the issues here that we're faced with today? Do we debate on a different status for ourselves as a people? I think we can't compare the FAS right now and say that, do you want to be freely associated right now? I think it's really a good option, knowing the economy of the islands, knowing what it is that we have. I don't think that we can compare ourselves to our sister islands nearby, who, look at where they started when they became a freely associated states. What was economy like for them when they started out the venture of freely associated states? So I'd like to take a look at just within the Commonwealth, and there are times when I figured if my culture and my language is at stake, then I don't see why I should continue in this kind of a reality. Then an option has to be raised for me. That will be my responsibility. I thank you, John, for allowing me the extra 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Enos. And our final presentation from a panelist will be, as I said, Pete A. Tenorio. He will have the final chance to say a few words about Mr. Willen's presentation and the covenant. Where do we go from here? Pete?
You know, I didn't realize that I took 20 minutes this morning for my presentation, so I asked Sam to make sure that this time he monitored me clearly. 22 years ago, when I was speaking in front of an audience in the community meetings and political gatherings, when I look out, I look and see about 95% of the audience composition are indigenous people. Now today, I counted and recounted and count again, and out of 63 heads and bodies out here in the audience, including the panelists, 30 are locals and 33 are not. Now this tells me something quite important with respect to my own particular view about how the covenant was negotiated and how the benefits, the so-called unexpected participation of others that are eligible to participate become a major factor in creating a lot of problems to us that many of us probably are not aware of. You know, my vision of a covenant was to negotiate a covenant for the benefits of the indigenous people. I'm not trying to be a separatist, a racist, or anything. I want to be very frank and open about this because I think it needs to be articulated for the United States government to understand a little bit of where we're coming from. When I was a member of the Political Status Commission, my understanding was that my responsibility was to negotiate the covenant for the benefit of the indigenous people. After the covenant was approved and was implemented, everybody comes into the picture. They join on the bandwagon, they come to Saipan, the CNMA, and enjoy the benefits that were, I thought, the local representatives of the commission had negotiated on behalf of the indigenous people, but everybody else benefit. The Economic Development Loan Program, which was about $1 million at that time, was opened up for anybody that comes in from the mainland, from Guam, eligible under the so-called criteria of U.S. citizen to participate. And then it becomes a very much of a dilemma in my own past too. Why then would the United States be raising so much complaints and so much concerns about what we're doing out here, when in effect, you know, the almost 50% of the covenant benefit that was originally intended, as I understand it, and I may be wrong, for the indigenous Carolinian and Chamorros, actually subsequently become so diluted that we ended up being participants of the minority portion of the rights and benefits that we once had as an indigenous group. Now, does the U.S. government take this kind of scenario into consideration when looking at us and trying to give us some kind of a benefits, a ratio, formula, grant, or something like that? That you know, that the benefits are not only the local Chamorlinians. The beneficiaries are not the beneficiaries of food stamps, medical services, other kind of government services encompasses everybody. It's not just the brown Micronesians or the Marianans or the Carolinians. It's an integrated society now. And I wish that, you know, this is articulated as a way to educate. Some people talk about educating the policymakers of the United States, the federal government and the Congress, about the need for them to understand the history. History had changed completely from the time 20 years ago. Now it's a different situation, different social environment, and we need to articulate this so that maybe perhaps they would open up their minds and realize that, gee, we have been unfair to these people. They no longer have their political destiny, and we certainly don't. When we negotiate the provision for immigration control, we did not want the so-called immigrants from Asia, 200,000 out of every year, to immigrate from their countries into Saipan, into the Northern Marianas. And we did this, we demonstrate this to the people, the representative of the U.S., that this is one of the reasons why we don't want you know, the U.S. immigration to apply. We want to control our own immigration with respect to political control, economic control. We don't want to be overrun by outsiders, as you know, through the process of application of the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service. And the U.S. representative understood and acknowledged this. Now they're saying that you have too many people here, too many non-resident workers, knowing full well at the time of the negotiation that we told them so, that we will have, we don't know the exact amount, exact number, but looking at the financial obligations that they were supposed to provide to us and the prospect of a very dynamic economic investment by the other foreign countries, we anticipate quite a large number of non-resident workers, because we still believe at that time that for the economy to move forward, to grow, and to be able to gradually attain, you know, some sense of economic self-sufficiency, we gotta start investment, we gotta start putting up the infrastructure, and we gotta start spending the money from the federal government. We want, as part of the goal of the covenant status, to be very progressive. We want we don't want to be like Micronesia, where they want to maintain their own traditional way of living and traditional way of economic progress. That's their prerogative, but I think it's one of the goals that was mentioned by Howard, economic development, but a faster way. Guam had 30, 40 years of so-called advanced planning and experience in that area, and we were just trying to catch up. We're just getting started. So I wanted to change really the subject of some of the concerns and address the issues like what I'm talking about to the federal U.S. government, to make them understand that the Commonwealth is a completely different a picture now. It's no longer a pure indigenous group that is out here. We have a whole bunch of different Americans here, and they're all here under the U.S. flag, U.S. protection.